For years, the nation's most elite snipers trained relentlessly. They had the best weapons, the most advanced technology, and endless drills. Yet, every mission ended in frustration. They could not land the impossible shot that would change everything. Then, in the most unlikely place, they found their answer. A humble village woman, with no military background, held the wisdom they lacked. Her simple but profound understanding of patience, rhythm, and the land would transform them forever. This is not a story of technology or firepower, it is a story of wisdom, humility, and how the most unexpected teacher can unlock greatness. For decades, the Special Forces Sniper program had been one of the most prestigious and demanding in the nation's military. Men and women who entered were considered the elite of the elite soldiers, trained to perform the most precise, most difficult shots under the harshest conditions. They were schooled in patience, endurance, and calculation. Every day was a war against their own limits. Yet, despite the years of relentless training, there was a single mission objective that haunted them. A shot so impossibly distant, so fraught with environmental challenges, that none of them, not even the sharpest eyes in the unit, could make it consistently. It was not a matter of their rifles. They carried the best equipment modern science could create, scopes that magnified 1,000-fold. Rifles engineered with microscopic precision, ammunition calibrated to the finest grain. It was not a matter of strength or focus either. These men and women had endured grueling months of crawling through mud, of lying perfectly still for hours beneath scorching heat or bone-chilling rain, of controlling their own heartbeat to steady their aim, and still, the impossible shot eluded them. Every attempt ended the same way, with the bullet veering slightly off its mark, carried astray by the whisper of wind, the subtle tremor of breath, or a miscalculation so small it could barely be measured. Again and again, they failed. Commanders grew restless. Generals pressed for results. The sniper school had invested years into creating perfection, yet perfection never came. Every report read the same: close, but not enough; skilled, but inconsistent; potential, but never mastery. Inside the training grounds, morale was sinking. Private Daniels, the youngest of the snipers, had started to doubt his own worth. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the barracks, replaying his failures. Why can I not do it? He wondered. Why, after years of sweat and sacrifice, can I not achieve what is asked of me? Beside him, Sergeant Miller, older, battle-hardened, a man who had seen combat across deserts and mountains, was equally tormented. He had faced enemies in real war zones, endured hunger and exhaustion. Yet nothing gnawed at his spirit like this constant failure. The target was lifeless, unmoving, predictable. And yet, it defeated him every time, the snipers whispered among themselves. Some began to suspect the mission itself was cursed. Others believed it was a test designed to break them down, a cruel exercise with no real answer. Their instructors offered no comfort. Instead, they pushed harder. The training sessions grew longer, harsher. Hours in prone position turned into days. Breathing exercises became punishments. Silence in the barracks became heavier, colder, still. The results remained the same. Then came the turning point. One afternoon, during a routine trial, the entire unit was assembled at the long-range field. The sun was unforgiving, glaring down upon them as if mocking their struggle. The wind carried dust into their eyes, but no one dared move. Sergeant Miller went first. He adjusted his scope, steadied his breath, aligned his shot with mathematical precision. He had done this thousands of times. His finger curled around the trigger. His heartbeat slowed, and the shot rang out. The bullet sped across the distance faster than sound, faster than thought. And yet, as it struck, it missed the bullseye by inches. A collective silence followed. Private Daniels stepped up next. His hands trembled as he took position, the weight of his failure heavy upon him. He whispered to himself, a desperate mantra. This time I will make it. His shot echoed, his eyes fixed upon the target, his heart hoping for redemption. Another miss. One by one, the snipers took their turns. And one by one, they failed. Each shot closer than the last, but none precise enough to claim mastery. The commander's face darkened. His words, though calm, cut like a blade. You are supposed to be the sharpest eyes in this nation. And yet, you cannot see what is right in front of you. That night, silence filled the barracks. Not the silence of discipline, but of despair. Soldiers sat on their bunks, heads bowed, hands gripping rifles as though the weapons themselves might whisper answers. Daniels buried his face in his palms. Miller clenched his fists, furious at himself. For the first time, the unit felt powerless. The impossible shot loomed like a shadow over their lives, haunting their dreams, crushing their confidence. It was no longer just a test of skill, it had become a test of spirit. But little did they know, the answer would not come from their instructors, nor from more training, nor from the machines they trusted. The answer would come from the most unexpected teacher, a village woman, watching them quietly from a distance. And she would give them not just a technique, but a lesson that would change their understanding of mastery forever. The sniper unit's failure weighed heavily on the commanders. Reports of their struggles reached the highest levels, and whispers of disbanding the program began to spread. Yet, before making such a drastic decision, the military decided to relocate the team. The reasoning was simple. If the soldiers could not succeed in the sterile, controlled environment of the training grounds, perhaps reality itself, the unpredictability of life, would sharpen their instincts. So, one morning, long before the sun stretched across the horizon, trucks rumbled through winding dirt roads, carrying the weary snipers toward a remote valley. Their orders were straightforward: continue training, adapt to new conditions, and attempt the impossible shot again. When the trucks stopped, the snipers stepped out into a land unlike any they had known. It was a small village, nestled between rolling hills and open plains. Mud brick houses lined narrow paths. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. The air carried the scent of earth, livestock, and freshly baked bread. Children darted between homes, their laughter a striking contrast to the silence of the soldiers. The villagers paused their chores when the convoy arrived. Farmers stood still with tools in hand, women shielded their eyes from the sun to watch, and elders leaned on walking sticks, observing with quiet curiosity. For many, this was the first time they had seen soldiers in full uniform, men and women clad in camouflage, rifles slung over their shoulders, their faces grim and unreadable. The soldiers, for their part, remained equally silent. They were trained to be cautious, to reveal little, to blend into shadows. Yet, even they could not ignore the weight of dozens of eyes studying them with equal parts respect, fear, and wonder. Among the onlookers stood a woman. She was not young nor frail, but carried herself with a kind of quiet strength. A woven scarf covered her hair, and her hands were calloused from years of labor. Her gaze lingered on the soldiers longer than anyone else's. She did not see rifles and uniforms. She saw something deeper. Exhaustion, frustration, defeat hidden behind pride. The soldiers set up their camp on the outskirts of the village, where the fields stretched into the horizon. The landscape was open and unforgiving, perfect for long-range training. From sunrise to sunset, gunfire echoed across the valley, breaking the stillness of village life. Children would stop their games to watch in awe as bullets cracked through the air. Farmers would pause in their fields, listening to the sharp rhythm of practice. And the villagers began to notice something strange. No matter how often the soldiers trained, their faces carried the same expression at the end of the day: disappointment. The woman noticed more than anyone. She often passed near the training fields, carrying baskets of vegetables or leading goats to pasture. She observed from a distance, her sharp eyes taking in every detail: the soldiers' stiff postures, their rushed breaths, their obsession with the mechanical details of the shot. She could sense their restlessness, their refusal to wait, their endless cycle of failure and frustration. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of crimson and gold, she stopped to watch them again. The unit was gathered around targets set deep into the plains. One by one, the snipers took turns firing, and one by one, the bullets missed their marks. The woman tilted her head slightly, narrowing her eyes. To her, it was clear. The soldiers were aiming with their weapons, but not with their souls. They measured the wind, the distance, the angles. Yet they did not feel them. She thought of the hunters in her village, men who had no advanced scopes, no rifles of steel, no decades of training. Yet, with nothing but simple bows and patience, they never missed. They hunted not by numbers or calculations, but by rhythm, listening to the earth, the wind, even the silence between heartbeats. That night, while the soldiers gathered in their tents to brood over another day of failure, the woman sat outside her home, gazing at the stars. She wondered if she should speak to them, these strangers weighed down by pride and defeat. Would they even listen to a village woman? Would they accept wisdom that came not from textbooks, but from the soil beneath their feet? The next morning, the soldiers returned to the field. Their commander barked orders, frustration dripping from every syllable. The team obeyed, though their eyes betrayed their hopelessness. And once again, she was there, watching quietly from the edge of the field, a basket balanced in her hands. This time, she did not simply watch. She stepped forward. The soldiers stiffened, surprised. Villagers rarely approached during training, and none had dared interrupt before. Yet she walked calmly, her steps steady, her gaze unwavering. Sergeant Miller lowered his rifle, frowning. Private Daniels glanced nervously at the commander. The air thickened with unease. Finally, she stopped just a few paces away. Her voice, though gentle, carried with it a strength that silenced the field. "You aim with your eyes," she said, her accent wrapping around the words like silk. "But not with your spirit." The soldiers blinked. Confused, she lifted her hand and pointed to the horizon. "The earth has a rhythm. The wind has a voice. If you do not listen to them, no weapon will ever obey you." For a moment, no one moved. The commander's lips parted as if to dismiss her. But the quiet authority in her tone froze even him. The soldiers stared at her. These warriors trained in science and calculation, now confronted by a woman whose wisdom seemed born not of machines, but of life itself. And though some scoffed silently, others felt something stir within them. Could it be that the answer they had sought for years did not lie in their weapons, their drills, or their manuals, but in the unshakable stillness of a village woman who had never fired a rifle in her life? The sun dipped low, staining the horizon with streaks of fire and amber. Training had ended for the day, but the echoes of missed shots still lingered in the snipers' minds. They sat in silence, wiping sweat from their brows, polishing their rifles out of habit more than hope. The impossible target mocked them, still standing untouched in the distance, as if daring them to try again tomorrow. Private Daniel sat apart from the others, his young face shadowed by frustration. He had fired dozens of rounds today, and every single one had ended in disappointment. He replayed each miss in his mind, searching for errors. Was it his stance, his breathing, his timing? None of it made sense. Nearby, Sergeant Miller watched him. Miller, with his weathered face and scarred hands, had lived long enough to know that sometimes answers did not come no matter how hard one searched. But watching Daniels, he felt the weight of his own failure pressing down even harder. If a veteran like him could not make the impossible shot, how could a boy like Daniels ever hope to? The soldiers did not notice at first when the village woman appeared again. She carried no baskets this time, no excuse of chores. She came with purpose. Her steps were slow but firm, her scarf catching the dying light like a crown of resilience. When she reached the edge of the training field, the soldiers stiffened. Some exchanged uneasy glances. It was unusual. No villager had ever dared to intrude on their training ground twice. The commander noticed her too. His jaw tightened, prepared to send her away. Yet something about her calm presence, the unshaken steadiness of her eyes, made him hesitate. She stopped only a few steps from the soldiers. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her gaze swept across them, met their rifles, their sweat-streaked faces, their tense shoulders. Then, she spoke, her voice low but firm enough that even the wind seemed too still to listen. "You soldiers," she began, "have strong arms and sharp eyes. But you fail because you do not see." Daniels frowned. "We do see. That's all we've been doing." She shook her head gently. "No, you look, but you do not see. You aim with your weapons, but not with your spirit." The soldiers exchanged confused glances. To them, shooting was about calculation, distance, wind speed, trigger pressure. Spirit had nothing to do with it. The commander stepped forward, irritation flickering in his tone. "Madam, we appreciate your concern, but these are matters of military science, not village tales." Her eyes met his, steady as stone. "Science is blind without wisdom," she replied. "You measure numbers, but you ignore the rhythm of the world around you." Her words hung in the air like a riddle. Sergeant Miller, curious despite himself, asked quietly, "And what rhythm do you mean?" The woman turned her gaze to the horizon, where the fields swayed under the evening breeze. She raised a hand as though listening to something beyond their reach. "The wind speaks," she said softly. "It changes, it pauses, it carries your bullet like a river carries a leaf. The earth beneath you breathes it, rises and falls with heat and cold, with day and night. Even your body is a rhythm, your heart, your breath, your thoughts. You try to force the shot, but you do not wait for the world to guide it." The soldiers were silent. Some shifted uncomfortably, embarrassed by the strangeness of her words. Others felt an unexpected sting of recognition, as if she had peeled back layers of pride to expose the truth they had buried. Daniels muttered under his breath, "This is nonsense." But even as he said it, part of him wondered, why did her words feel heavier than the countless lectures he had heard from instructors? The woman crouched, scooping up a handful of dust. She let it trickle through her fingers, carried away by the breeze. "The hunter in my village does not force his arrow," she said. "He waits, he listens. He breathes with the wind. When the world is ready, the shot is ready. Never before. Never after." She stood again, her eyes meeting Miller's. "You soldiers fight the world as if it is your enemy. But sometimes, to win, you must let the world fight beside you." For the first time in weeks, Miller felt something stir within him. Her words seemed to echo the very thing that had haunted him, the feeling that no matter how much he calculated, something was missing. Perhaps it was not more numbers he needed, but silence. Not more control, but surrender. The commander scoffed lightly, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. "You speak poetry, not tactics." The woman tilted her head. "And yet, what has your tactics given you? Failure upon failure, that cut deeper than any bullet." The soldiers shifted, unable to deny the truth. Their pride resisted, but their hearts knew she was right. At last, Miller spoke. "What would you have us do?" The woman's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Stop aiming with only your eyes. Begin listening with your soul. Breathe not to control, but to join the world around you. Then when the silence between heartbeats comes, take your shot." Her words fell like seeds in dry soil, strange, fragile, but holding the possibility of life. The soldiers did not answer. Some scoffed quietly, unwilling to believe. Others remained pensive, her wisdom pressing against the walls of their doubt. As the woman turned to leave, she glanced once more at the distant target. Her final words drifted back to them on the wind. "You cannot master the bullet until you master yourselves." The field grew silent. The soldiers stared at one another, torn between disbelief and the nagging sense that something profound had just touched their lives. For years, they had trained under generals, studied manuals, and trusted machines. Yet in a single evening, a village woman had given them a truth none of their training had ever offered, and though they did not know it yet, her words would become the key to unlocking the impossible. The following morning, the soldiers rose before dawn as they always did. Their commander barked orders, Drills commenced, and the endless ritual of precision and failure began anew. Yet, something was different. Her words still lingered. Even the most skeptical soldier, though unwilling to admit it aloud, found himself replaying the woman's voice in his mind. You aim with your eyes, but not with your spirit. The earth has a rhythm, the wind has a voice. Private Daniels tried to ignore it. He told himself it was nonsense, peasant superstition. But when he adjusted his scope and the breeze tickled across his cheek, he remembered the way she had let dust flow through her fingers, listening to the wind as if it spoke. He hesitated a fraction longer before pulling the trigger. The shot missed as always, but the hesitation haunted him. Sergeant Miller, on the other hand, could not shake her words at all. Unlike Daniels, he had lived long enough to understand that wisdom often came from unlikely places. He remembered the way his father had once taught him to hunt deer back home, not with a rifle, but with silence, patience, and the willingness to wait. He had forgotten those lessons in the noise of war and training. The woman's words had rekindled them. By midday, the woman returned. The soldiers stiffened at her approach, but she walked with the same quiet confidence, her presence as natural as the breeze itself. This time, she carried nothing in her hands, no baskets, no tools. Only her intent. The commander scowled, ready to dismiss her. But Miller spoke first. "Let her speak," he said, his voice calm but commanding. He had authority among the soldiers, and even the commander hesitated at his insistence. The woman studied them for a moment, before lowering herself gracefully onto the ground. She picked up a small stone, held it between her fingers, and closed her eyes. "Today," she said softly, "you will not fire your rifles. You will listen." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Training without firing felt absurd. Yet something in her tone brooked no argument. She placed the stone on the earth. "Sit," she instructed. Reluctantly, they obeyed. Soldiers accustomed to discipline, to standing tall and rigid, now found themselves cross-legged in the dust, facing a village woman as if they were children before a teacher. "Close your eyes," she continued. "Breathe. Do not control it, just notice it. The rise and fall, the pause between each breath." Some resisted at first, peeking from behind their lids. Others sighed impatiently. But Miller obeyed, and slowly, one by one, the others followed. "Now," she said, her voice calm as a lullaby, "listen to the wind. Feel how it moves against your skin. Hear its song through the grass. Do not fight it. Do not measure it. Just know it." For the first time, the soldiers allowed themselves to simply be still. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves, the cry of distant birds, the whisper of air. The soldiers' rigid postures softened. Even Daniels, though skeptical, felt a strange peace creep into his chest. Then she spoke again. "The world does not hurry, and yet everything is done in its time. You rush, you force, you command the bullet to obey you. But the bullet obeys only the world." She opened her eyes and looked at them. "You must learn to move with it, not against it." That afternoon, she led them to the edge of the field where the tall grasses bent in waves beneath the breeze. She pointed. "Watch," she said. The soldiers stared, puzzled. Not with your eyes, she corrected. With your whole being. See how the grass does not resist the wind. It bends, it follows. It survives because it yields. Her hand moved to the distant hills. The wind changes here. It dips and swirls. You cannot command it, but you can wait for it to carry you. Then, in a motion as fluid as water, she bent low and drew a bow from a young boy who had been watching nearby. It was a simple hunting bow, rough and worn. She notched an arrow, inhaled deeply, and stood perfectly still. The soldiers watched, skeptical but curious. Moments passed. She did not release. She waited, breathing, listening. Then, suddenly, her fingers let go. The arrow flew straight and true, striking a mark on a distant tree trunk with startling accuracy. She turned back to them. It is not power that made the arrow fly. It is patience. The soldiers exchanged glances. Some rolled their eyes, but others, Miller most of all, felt a tremor of understanding. That evening, she taught them again. Not with rifles, but with silence. She told them to feel the earth beneath their bodies when they lay prone, to sense the pause in their own heartbeat, to let the world tell them when to act. For men and women trained in calculation, it was maddening. But slowly, over days, something began to change. Private Daniels, once restless, found himself listening more closely to the rustle of wind. Miller, once hardened by war, began to breathe with ease again. Even the commander, though resistant, noticed subtle shifts in his team: calmer hands, steadier eyes, quieter minds. The woman's lessons were simple, almost laughably so compared to the manuals they had studied, but simplicity carried a power none of them had expected. One night, as they sat by the fire, Miller spoke quietly to Daniels. "You feel it, don't you?" Daniels hesitated. Then he nodded. "I don't understand it, but it's like the world slows down when I listen." Miller smiled faintly. "That's her gift. She's teaching us what all our training never did, how to stop fighting the world and let it guide us." The boy said nothing more, but when he closed his eyes, he could still hear the woman's words echoing. "You cannot master the bullet until you master yourselves." Little by little, the impossible no longer seemed unreachable. Days turned into weeks, and the soldiers' camp no longer carried the same restless frustration. Where once they had grumbled over missed shots and wasted bullets, now they trained with a strange new discipline: quiet, steady, almost reverent. The woman's presence had become part of their routine. She did not force herself into their drills. She did not replace their manuals or bark orders. Instead, she slipped into the edges of their training like the wind itself, unnoticed at first, yet gradually shaping everything. Each morning, before the rifles were loaded, she gathered them at the field's edge. They would stand barefoot on the earth, grounding themselves, their rifles lying untouched nearby. She would close her eyes and ask them to breathe not as soldiers, but as living beings. "Count the silence between heartbeats," she instructed. "Feel it. That pause is where you find clarity. That pause is where the world speaks." At first, many resisted. Soldiers were not taught to listen to silence. They were taught to command it with gunfire. But slowly, resistance gave way to curiosity, and curiosity gave way to trust. Private Daniels, who once mocked the entire exercise, found himself returning each dawn without being told. He had noticed something startling when he calmed his breath, when he aligned his awareness with the whispering wind. His hands no longer trembled as they once did. The rifle felt lighter, steadier, almost a part of him rather than a burden he carried. Sergeant Miller, seasoned by years of war, began to see his surroundings differently. He no longer scanned the horizon only for targets. He listened to the way the hills carried sound. He watched the grass bend to reveal invisible currents. He felt, for the first time, that the world itself was teaching him to see. Even the commander, who had initially sneered at the idea of learning from a village woman, began to soften. He noticed his unit was calmer, less anxious, more focused. Their quarrels diminished. Their discipline grew stronger without his constant correction. Though his pride kept him silent, he, too, began to stand barefoot at dawn, pretending it was only to observe. But deep inside, he was learning as much as the rest. One afternoon, the woman tested them. She led them into the hills, where targets had been set against shifting winds. Normally, this drill ended in disappointment bullets scattering wide, frustration mounting, but this time, she gave them no rifles. Instead, she handed each soldier a stone throw. She said simply. Confused murmurs rippled through the group. A stone cannot strike from this distance. Daniels argued. You misunderstand, she replied. The stone is not the point. Your body is the weapon. Your mind is the trigger. Throw not with muscle, but with patience. Throw when the wind calls to you. Skeptical, but obedient, they tried. One after another, stones flew awkwardly, landing short or wide. Laughter broke out among them, but she silenced it with a glance. Again, she said firmly. They tried again, and again. Hours passed. Slowly, their throws grew more precise, not because they had grown stronger, but because they had begun to feel the moment. The pause between the wind's gusts. The stillness in their own bodies. The rhythm of the world around them. Finally, Miller released a stone just as the wind calmed. It struck the target with a sharp crack. His eyes widened in disbelief. The woman only smiled. Now, she said softly, you begin to understand. The soldiers returned to camp that night with something new in their hearts. They had touched a truth that no manual, no commander, no bullet had ever revealed. The following days brought further transformation. Where once their training was mechanical measure, aim, fire it, became almost like a dance. They listened before they acted. They breathed before they aimed. They waited for the earth's rhythm, rather than forcing their own. Targets that had once mocked them with their distance, now fell with startling accuracy. Shots that once wavered, now cut through the air with deadly precision. Even Daniels, once the loudest skeptic, struck his mark one afternoon at nearly twice his usual range. He lowered his rifle in disbelief, his chest rising with quiet triumph. I did it, he whispered. The woman nodded. No, you allowed it. You did not fight the wind. You followed it. The men and women of the unit began to notice more than just their improved aim. They noticed how calm they felt under pressure, how little their hands shook in the face of tension, how silence became their ally instead of their enemy. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Miller approached the woman while she tended a small fire. "Why are you helping us?" he asked. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Because you are men and women far from home, burdened by noise. You came to our village seeking war, but the earth has given you a chance to listen. If you learn this, perhaps you will carry peace with you, even in battle." Miller bowed his head. He did not know what to say. The transformation was not only in their skill, but in their spirit. The soldiers who once mocked each other now shared silent respect. The ones who once cursed failure now encouraged patience. The camp that once echoed with frustration now hummed with quiet confidence. They were becoming something their commanders had never imagined. Not just trained snipers, but warriors in tune with the rhythm of the world, and though none of them could explain it fully, they knew deep down that their transformation had come not from endless drills or calculations, but from the quiet wisdom of a village woman who had taught them to stop fighting the wind. The morning of the test came without warning. The unit had been at camp, practicing silently as they had grown accustomed to, when a messenger arrived on horseback. Dust clung to his uniform, and urgency lit his face. "Enemy movement spotted in the valley," he announced breathlessly. "Scouts say their generals are meeting under heavy guard. Command wants eyes and rifles on them now." The commander stiffened. This was no drill. This was war in its rawest form. A single mistake could cost not just their mission, but countless lives. For the soldiers, it was the moment that had haunted them for years, the chance to prove their skill. The chance to strike a blow at the enemy leadership. But instead of excitement, fear rippled through the group. They knew their history of failure. They knew the ridicule they had endured. But then Miller spoke. His voice was calm, almost steady in its certainty. "We're ready." The others turned to him, startled. Daniels frowned. "Ready? We've failed this shot 100 times over." Miller met his eyes. "Not this time. Not anymore." The woman stood in the background, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, but the smallest nod passed between her and Miller. As if acknowledging that the lessons were about to be tested, they set out across the hills. Moving silently in the patterns the woman had taught them, each step deliberate, each pause a moment of listening. By the time they reached the ridgeline overlooking the valley, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. Below them, the enemy camp sprawled like a living beast, tents rising in neat rows, smoke curling from fires, soldiers moving in disciplined formations. At its heart, a large pavilion stood, guarded by heavily armed men. Inside, they could see the silhouettes of the generals. The commander whispered orders, but for once, the soldiers didn't need them. They already knew what to do. They lay prone, rifles steady. For years, this moment had been their undoing. The distance, the shifting wind, the endless calculations, it had always been too much. But now, as they pressed their cheeks against their stocks, something was different. They breathed slowly, steadily. The valley was alive with sound, the rustle of banners, the murmur of soldiers, the whistle of wind, but instead of distraction, it felt like a guide. They noticed the way the grass leaned, the way the smoke twisted, the rhythm of the gusts. Daniels, usually the most anxious, felt his heart race. But then he remembered her words. Count the silence between heartbeats. He did. And suddenly, time slowed. Miller scanned the target, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He was not forcing the shot. He was waiting, listening. The woman's voice echoed in his mind. The bullet obeys the world, not you. The wind shifted once, twice. Then, there was a stillness. It was brief, fragile, but enough. Now, Miller whispered, almost in unison. The rifles fired. The crack of gunfire split the air, rolling across the valley. The bullets cut through the silence, guided not by force but by patience, by rhythm, by trust. Seconds later, chaos erupted below. Guards shouted, soldiers scrambled, the pavilion quaked with shouts of alarm. Through their scopes, the soldiers saw the impossible, the generals, once untouchable, collapsing in shock and confusion. The shots had landed perfectly. For a moment, no one breathed. The soldiers remained frozen, their minds unwilling to believe what their eyes showed them. Then, slowly, Daniels lowered his rifle. His hands trembled not with fear, but with awe. We did it, he whispered. His voice cracked, his disbelief turning to joy. We actually did it. Miller exhaled deeply, a weight lifting from his shoulders. No, he corrected softly. She did it. Through us, the commander, stunned, could not find words. For years, he had doubted them, mocked them, cursed their failures. Now, he watched his unit achieve what no one else could. His pride, once rooted in arrogance, was humbled. Behind them, the woman stood, her face calm, her eyes shining with quiet knowing. She had not touched a rifle, yet her wisdom had fired every shot. The valley below descended into turmoil. Enemy soldiers scattering, the chain of command shattered. The mission was a success beyond all expectations. But for the unit, the true victory was not in the generals they had felled, but in the transformation they had undergone. They were no longer the frustrated, broken snipers who had once cursed their fate. They were warriors who had learned patience, silence, and trust. As they retreated into the safety of the hills, Daniels fell into step beside Miller. "How did you know?" he asked. Miller glanced at him. "I didn't, I just listened. To the wind, to her, to everything we tried to fight before." Daniels nodded slowly, his eyes wide with newfound understanding. For the first time in years, the unit walked not as failures but as soldiers reborn. And though war still raged around them, they carried a secret in their hearts. Secret taught not by generals, not by manuals, but by a village woman who had shown them how to let the world guide their aim. That night, back at camp, the celebration was subdued but profound. There were no loud songs or drunken boasts. Instead, they sat in quiet satisfaction, the fire crackling between them. The commander, still humbled, raised a cup in the woman's direction. "You've done what I could not," he admitted. "You've given them what years of training never could." The woman only smiled, shaking her head. "I gave them nothing. They already carried it within. I only reminded them to listen." Silence followed. But it was a silence filled with gratitude, with awe, with respect, and as the stars burned above, the soldiers realized they had experienced more than a breakthrough in skill. They had discovered a way of seeing the world that would stay with them long after the rifles were set aside. Asterisk. The campfire burned low, its embers glowing like scattered stars across the dirt. The soldiers sat in a loose circle, their rifles resting beside them. For once, no one spoke of failure, no one cursed the wind or the distance. They sat in quiet reflection, each man and woman carrying the weight of what they had accomplished that day. The air was thick with unspoken questions. How had they done it? How had years of failure given way to such perfect precision in a single afternoon? And why had it taken the guidance of a village woman to unlock what their manuals and commanders never could? Sergeant Miller sat with his hands clasped, staring into the fire. His face, usually carved with tension, was softened by thought. Daniels, on the other hand, could not contain himself. "I still don't understand," he said finally, shaking his head. His voice cracked with disbelief. "I've missed that shot 100 times. I've cursed at the wind until I nearly lost my mind. But today..." He paused, his eyes wide with the memory. Today it felt different. Like the wind wasn't my enemy anymore. Like it was telling me where to aim. The others nodded in agreement. No one laughed at Daniels this time. They had all felt it too, the strange shift, the uncanny alignment between themselves and the world around them. The commander, who had remained unusually quiet since the mission, cleared his throat. His stern eyes flicked toward the woman who sat just beyond the circle, her face illuminated by the glow of the fire. She had not joined in their conversation, nor sought recognition. She simply sat there, calm and silent, as if she already knew what they were grappling with. "You," the commander said at last, his voice heavy with reluctant respect. "You've done something I could not. For years, I pushed them. I drilled them. I broke them down and built them up again, but they failed every time. And then you..." He gestured at her, his jaw tightening. "You speak of wind and patience, and suddenly they succeed where I could not make them." How? All eyes turned to the woman. She did not flinch beneath the commander's scrutiny. Instead, she smiled faintly and reached down, gathering a handful of dirt in her palm. She let it spill slowly through her fingers, the grains carried away by the breeze. "You tried to teach them control," she said softly. "But you cannot control the wind. You cannot command the earth or silence your own heartbeat by force. You made them fight against what should have been their ally." Her gaze lifted, sweeping across the soldiers. "I did not give them anything new. I only reminded them of what they had forgotten, that the world does not bend to your will, but it will guide you if you learn to listen." Daniels swallowed hard. "But how? How did you know this? You're not a soldier. You've never fired a rifle." The woman's eyes softened. "Do you think only soldiers understand the world?" she asked gently. "I have lived here all my life. The earth, the wind, the silence, they are my teachers. I listen to them because I must. To plant, to harvest, to survive. You carry weapons, but you are no different from me. You live and breathe beneath the same sky." The words struck them like an arrow. The simplicity of her truth was undeniable. For years, they had complicated everything, calculating angles, obsessing over numbers, fighting against forces they could not master. And yet, the answer had been as simple as breathing, waiting, listening. The commander bowed his head, humbled. "I see now," he said quietly. "All my commands, all my manuals, they blinded us. We were so busy trying to master the rifle that we forgot to master ourselves." Miller spoke then, his voice heavy with gratitude. "You've given us more than skill. You've given us peace." For the first time in years, I felt calm when I pulled the trigger today. I wasn't angry at the wind or at myself. I was just steady. The woman inclined her head. "That steadiness was always yours. You simply stopped searching for it outside of yourself." A hush fell over the circle. The soldiers looked at her with new eyes, not as a peasant, not as a stranger, but as a teacher, a guide, perhaps even something greater. Daniels, his young face etched with awe, leaned forward. "Why help us at all? We came here as soldiers. We brought war to your village. Why would you care whether we succeeded or not?" The woman's gaze lingered on him. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, she spoke. "Because war takes enough," she said softly. "If I can give even a little wisdom in return, perhaps the balance is restored. You are far from home, burdened with duties you did not choose. If I can help you carry that burden more lightly, then perhaps fewer lives will be lost." Her words hung in the night air, heavy with truth. The commander, his pride stripped away, stood slowly. He walked to where she sat and bowed his head, a gesture none of the soldiers had ever seen from him. "You have my respect," he said simply, "and my gratitude. Without you, this mission would have ended in failure once again. But because of you, it became a victory." The soldiers followed his lead, each offering their thanks in their own quiet way. Some bowed, others murmured words of gratitude, and others simply looked at her with eyes full of reverence. For the first time since their training began, they no longer saw themselves as broken soldiers. They were something new, something whole, that night. As the fire died down and the stars stretched endlessly above, Miller whispered to Daniels, "You realize what this means, don't you? We'll never see the world the same way again." Daniels nodded, his expression thoughtful. "She didn't just make us better soldiers. She made us better men." And as sleep claimed them one by one, they carried with them the revelation that their greatest teacher had never set foot on a battlefield, never fired a rifle, and yet had given them the one thing no army could: clarity. The dawn after their breakthrough was unlike any other. The camp was quiet, but not with the silence of exhaustion. It was the silence of reflection. The soldiers moved differently now. Their steps were lighter, their eyes clearer, their breathing calm and deliberate. They had shed the weight of frustration and failure, and in its place carried something immeasurable: wisdom. The woman had left at first light, vanishing into the hills without ceremony. No words of farewell, no request for recognition. She had simply faded back into her world, leaving them to theirs. At first, the soldiers felt her absence keenly. Daniel searched the horizon that morning, hoping to see her figure outlined against the rising sun. Miller sat with his rifle across his knees, half expecting her voice to remind him to breathe, to wait. Even the commander, though silent, found himself looking toward the village more than once. But as the day wore on, they realized something profound. she had never truly left. Her presence lingered in every breath they took, in every pause before a shot, in the way they now felt the rhythm of the earth beneath their boots. She had not trained them to depend on her, she had trained them to depend on themselves. Their next missions proved it. Assignments that once filled them with dread became opportunities to practice what they had learned. They no longer clung to calculations or cursed at the shifting wind. Instead, they adapted, listened, and trusted the silence. On one mission, Daniels, once the weakest among them, took a near impossible shot across a canyon. The bullet struck true, and when his comrades congratulated him, he only shook his head and said, "It wasn't me. It was the wind showing me when." Another time, Miller found himself under pressure, enemy forces closing in. In the past, he might have rushed, his nerves forcing a mistake. But now he waited, heart steady, and fired only when the world aligned. His precision saved his entire unit that day. Even the commander, once skeptical and harsh, grew gentler in his approach. He no longer barked constant corrections. Instead, he began every drill with the same words: "Breathe. Listen. The world will tell you what to do." His soldiers, stunned by the change, followed him with new respect. The transformation spread beyond the unit itself. Other divisions began to notice. Rumors spread of a group of snipers who never missed, whose calm under fire was unmatched. Commanders from neighboring camps sent men to observe them, to learn from them, when asked how they had achieved such mastery. Miller always answered the same way. "A woman from a village taught us to stop fighting the world and to let it guide us." At first, many laughed at the tale. But when they saw the soldiers' results with their own eyes, the laughter gave way to curiosity, then respect. Slowly, the woman's wisdom began to ripple outward, carried from camp to camp like seeds scattered on the wind. But the greatest legacy was not in their skill with rifles. It was in who they became as men and women. Daniels, once brash and impatient, grew into a soldier known for his steady presence. Younger recruits often gravitated toward him, and instead of mocking their mistakes, he taught them patience. "The world has its rhythm," he would say quietly. "Trust it. Don't rush it." Miller, hardened by years of war, found a strange peace he had never thought possible. He wrote letters home that carried a different tone, now not bitter reports of suffering, but reflections on lessons learned. In one letter, he wrote, "War has not ended, but inside me, a battle has been won. I no longer fight the wind. I walk with it." Even the commander, whose pride had once blinded him, began to change. He carried himself with humility, listening more, ordering less. He became known not just as a leader of men, but as a leader who could listen to silence and act when the time was right. The soldiers' lives had been touched by something far greater than marksmanship. They had been reshaped by wisdom that would stay with them long after the guns were silenced. Years later, when the war had ended and the soldiers returned home, the lessons endured. Daniels became a teacher, guiding young hunters and marksmen in his village. But more than skill, he taught them patience, humility, and respect for the earth. Many came to him seeking to learn how to shoot. They left having learned how to listen. Miller retired quietly, settling on a farm far from battlefields. He found solace in planting seeds, tending soil, watching crops grow in their own time. His neighbors often asked how he maintained such patience with the land. He would smile and say, "Because the earth has its rhythm, I only listen." Even the commander, once defined by rank and command, found a new purpose. He wrote a memoir, not of victories or strategies, but of the unexpected teacher who had changed everything. In its pages, he described her not as a mere villager, but as the greatest instructor he had ever encountered, and though none of them ever saw the woman again, her presence remained alive in their stories, in their teachings, in the way they walked through the world. In time, their tale became legend. Soldiers who had once been mocked as failures were remembered as masters who taught others to see beyond the rifle. The woman was remembered too not by name, for few ever knew it, but by her wisdom, passed down through whispered words. The bullet obeys the world, not you. Listen to the wind. Trust the silence. And so, her legacy lived on, not in monuments or medals, but in the calm hearts of those who had once fought against the wind and finally learned to walk with it.